Hi there, I'm Tick, and tonight we will listen. In the early hours of the morning, long before the sun peeked over the hills, the stone walls of the king's great castle stood quiet, not completely silent though. Deep within the stone, something always made a soft sound. The wind outside pushed against narrow windows. Somewhere far away in the servants' quarters, boots padded softly on old wooden floors, and down near the stable, a horse moved in its sleep, its chain clinking once and then going still again. But up in the tallest part of the castle, behind a thick oak door, the king was still in bed. He wasn't sleeping deeply, not really. Medieval kings did not sleep well. Their beds were large, yes, but not soft. They were made with ropes tied across a wooden frame and stuffed with rough wool or sometimes straw. The ropes made the bed sag in the middle if they weren't pulled tight enough, and the straw could poke through the cloth. The room was cold, even in summer, and the fire in the hearth had long gone out. The coals were no longer red, just black and quiet. The king's face twitched in sleep. His dreams were heavy with thoughts of meetings, names of lords, messages from other lands, and the sound of church bells. He rolled once, and then lay still again. Around the bed were 4 carved posts, rising up to support a canopy above him. This canopy kept out the drafts from the ceiling. Thick cloth curtains hung down on all sides of the bed, tied back just a little, enough for someone to peek in. As the first light of morning touched the top of the tallest tower, a quiet knock came at the chamber door. Knock, knock, knock. Then silence. No one entered until the king stirred. The knock was a signal. It told the king the time had come. He groaned softly, rubbed his eyes, and sat up slowly. The air hit his skin. It was cold and damp. The stone walls didn't hold warmth well, and there were no windows that opened, just narrow slits for arrows and light. He reached for a woolen cloth that lay beside his bed, wrapping it around his shoulders. Outside the chamber, 2 guards stood tall, their armor dull from the torchlight. They did not speak. One had a small bell clipped to his belt, but he didn't use it. That would be rude. Everything in the king's waking was done softly. No sudden noises, no loud voices. The first hour of a king's day began with quiet. Soon a page entered, a young boy not more than 12. He walked slowly, carefully, holding a candle in one hand and a folded piece of linen in the other. He placed the candle on a small wooden table and bowed. "My lord, the sun has touched the tower," he said softly. The king nodded, not speaking yet. His voice wasn't ready. He blinked at the candlelight, rubbed his beard, and reached for the basin of water that had been left nearby. It was cold. It was always cold. Water for washing had been fetched from the well and brought up in iron buckets. Now it sat in a large bowl with a cloth beside it. He dipped his hands in the water and let the chill hit his skin. Then he pressed the cloth to his face and wiped slowly. He did not smile. Medieval kings didn't smile in the morning. They prepared. They got ready. There was a schedule to follow. The page stepped back and waited as the king washed. He didn't help. Only the king's personal servant could do that, and he hadn't been called yet. This moment, this slow awakening, belonged to the king alone. The floor beneath his bare feet was cold stone. A thick carpet made from wool lay near the bed, but it didn't stretch far, so the king moved carefully. His knees ached a little. He was no longer young. The climb to bed the night before had taken energy. Climbing up spiral stairs in thick robes and boots wasn't easy, even for a man with a crown. Another knock at the door. This time it was a bit louder. The page opened it just a crack. "My lord's chamberlain waits." The king nodded again. Still no words. He walked over to the large oak chair near the fire and sat down. The coals had cooled, but someone had already stacked fresh wood beside them. The chamberlain entered, an older man with thin white hair and long fingers. He walked in slowly, carrying a small wooden box. "Good morning, my liege," he said with a low bow. "Shall I begin?" The king cleared his throat and said in a dry voice, "Begin." The chamberlain opened the box. Inside were little strips of cloth, each with writing on them. They listed the day's early tasks, special feast days, birthdays of other kings, and prayer reminders. He handed one to the page. "Warm cloak, then chapel, The page left quickly. The chamberlain turned back to the king. No news from the west this morning. No messengers arrived in the night. The king nodded. This was good. No messengers meant no new trouble. No new trouble meant today might move slowly. And slow was good. Slow meant calm. The page returned with the warm cloak. It was thick, lined with fur. The king slipped it over his shoulder. It made his back straighter. It gave weight to his movements. This was his cloak of mourning, different from his cloak of counsel or his cloak of riding. The chamberlain turned to the door and nodded. Now the servants entered. 2 men and 1 older woman. Each carried something. A tray of bread, a jug of warm watered wine, a small bowl with dried herbs. They didn't speak. They moved quietly, placing the items on the table beside the king's chair. The king reached for the bread. It was rough and plain. No butter, no cheese, just baked the night before and warmed again. He chewed slowly, sipping from the wine, letting the taste roll down without hurry. This meal wasn't for pleasure. It was for strength. He looked out through the narrow slit in the stone wall. Outside, the sky was pink. A few crows sat on the tower roof across the courtyard. A dog barked somewhere below, and a man shouted at it to hush. Soon a small group of men would arrive, his stewards and advisors, but not yet. First he had to walk to the chapel. The page helped him stand. He walked slowly toward the chamber. His boots were soft leather, laced high and worn in. The sound they made on the stone was like the shuffling of old papers, soft and scratchy. The hallway outside his chamber was still dark. Torches burned low in their iron holder. The walls were rough stone, and the ceiling curved like the inside of a barrel. He walked with the chamberlain beside him. Neither spoke. Their footsteps were the only sound. Down a flight of stairs, through an arched doorway, past 2 sleepy guards, and across a short bridge that connected the main keep to the chapel tower. The air outside was fresh, but sharp. It smelled of smoke, wet wood, and hay. The sky above was brighter now, but not yet blue. The world looked quiet, as if still thinking about whether to wake up. The chapel door stood open. Inside, the space was small. Rows of stone benches, a simple wooden cross on the far wall. Candles flickered near the altar. A monk stood silently, head bowed, holding a long piece of parchment with morning prayers written upon it. The king entered and bowed slightly. He knelt on a cushion near the front, folded his hands and said nothing. He stayed that way for a long time, thinking of nothing, not planning, not deciding, just breathing. The chapel was the only place where he could be still. No questions, no requests, no faces waiting for answers, just quiet. Outside the birds had begun to sing, but inside the stone walls of the king's world, the day was only just beginning. As the king rose slowly from his kneeling cushion, the stone floor of the chapel felt cold through the soles of his boots. His knees gave a small crack, barely audible over the soft rustle of his fur-lined cloak. He pressed one hand on the edge of the wooden bench to steady himself. A deep breath escaped his lips. Not a sigh, just a slow release of air, like the castle itself exhaling with him. Outside the chapel, the wind moved gently through the small cracks between the stones, making a soft whooshing sound. The sky had begun to brighten more. There was no direct sunlight yet, just a pale white glow resting over the tops of the towers. 2 guards stood near the exit door, silent and still. They did not salute. That was not the custom inside the chapel. Instead, they watched the king carefully, noting how he walked, how his shoulders rested, whether his eyes were clear or tired. Every movement of the king meant something, even if he said nothing. As he stepped back through the arched doorway and onto the bridge, the air felt different. There was moisture in it now, as if the morning fog was starting to rise from the nearby river. It carried the faint scent of grass, stone, and soot. The king did not rush. He walked at the same slow pace, his boots making quiet sounds against the stone slabs of the bridge. Behind him, the monk returned to prayer, and the chapel door creaked softly as it was pulled shut. Inside the castle again, the morning had awakened more fully. Down below, kitchen workers shouted to each other softly. A blacksmith hammered something in the far courtyard. A goat bleated once near the stable wall. The king didn't turn toward the noise. He knew what it was. He knew every sound that belonged to his castle. He returned to his chamber to find the servants had already changed his bedding. The curtains were tied neat. A fire now burned low in the hearth, with a warm orange glow licking the old black stones. The bed itself looked untouched, perfect again, but he didn't go near it. Instead, he sat in his wooden chair by the fire. A servant handed him another cloth, fresh and clean, and poured a small basin of warm water. The king washed his face again, slower this time, his fingers moving around his eyes, his forehead, his jawline. He looked at himself in a polished piece of metal used as a mirror. His beard was uneven, his hair stuck up on one side. He tilted his head and looked at the lines on his face. He passed the cloth back and stretched his arms above his head. The fur cloak fell from his shoulders a bit, and the chill came back to his skin. A quiet knock sounded at the door. 3 slow taps. It was the sign that his dressers had arrived. These were not just any servants. They were special attendants, trained in the careful and slow art of dressing a king. 2 older men and 1 middle-aged woman stepped inside, each carrying small wooden trays. The trays held folded cloth, belts and layers of linen. The chamberlain re-entered behind them, his hands clasped behind his back. "My lord, the time is set for your dressing," he said softly. The king said nothing. He simply stood. The woman stepped forward first. She gently unfastened the fur cloak and handed it to one of the men. Then she stepped aside. The king stood in only his long shirt now, made of heavy linen. It hung down past his knees. Another man stepped forward with a fresh undershirt, warmer and thicker. The king raised his arms slowly. The man pulled the old shirt off over his head, then helped him slide into the new one. It smelled faintly of herbs, something placed between the folds to keep insects away, maybe lavender or dried mint. Next came the hose, tight woolen leg coverings, laced with cords around the calf. The king sat for this. One man lifted each leg carefully, rolling the hose upward and tying each knot with care. The wool was scratchy. The king shifted in his seat, rubbing one ankle with his heel. The chamberlain read softly from a list of garments for the day. Today's weather is dry. Wind from the west. Riding gear not required. Velvet tunic, the green one with gold stitching, belt with crest, and ceremonial sword only. No armor needed. The woman stepped forward again with the tunic. It was folded precisely, every corner tucked. She unfolded it and held it open. The king slid his arms in. First one, then the other. The tunic was thick, soft and heavy at the hem. Embroidered patterns ran along the sleeves, little lions and curling vines. A broad belt followed, dark leather with a golden buckle shaped like a lion's face. It clicked shut with a low sound. Another layer added, a sleeveless outer robe, dyed in deep forest green. It hung past his knees, and moved gently when he shifted his weight. His hands brushed over the fabric slowly. It was worn but strong. Years of wear had made it soft in the right places. Then came the small crown, not the full golden crown for ceremonies. This was a lighter circlet, made of polished bronze. It rested gently around the top of his head. It was warm, having been kept near the fire. The woman stepped back. The men bowed. The king stood fully now, dressed, balanced, heavier in cloth, but straighter in posture. He looked down at his boots, still soft leather, and gave one nod. Outside his chamber, a trumpet sounded softly in the distance. Just one note, low and long. It was the sign that the council hall had been prepared. The king stepped toward the door. The hallway outside was no longer dim. Sunlight spilled through narrow windows high on the wall, casting sharp patterns on the floor. The torches had been snuffed. Fresh rushes lined the hallway, dry grass and herbs, laid down to soften footsteps and keep the air sweet. His boots brushed against the rushes with every step. The path to the council hall was long and twisted. The castle was not built in straight lines. Its rooms followed the hill's curve. There were tight turns, short stairways, narrow doorways with low stone arches. But the king knew the way without thinking. Servants bowed as he passed. Some held baskets of fruit. Some carried small folded paper. Some simply stood, hands behind their backs, waiting for orders. He passed through an iron-bound door and entered a short corridor lined with red cloth banners. These banners held the symbols of nearby noble families. Some banners were bright and new, others were faded with age. At the far end of the hall, 2 guards opened tall wooden doors. The council hall was wide and cold. The floor was stone, polished, smooth by years of boots. A long table stretched from one wall to the other, with high-backed wooden chairs set evenly around it. The chair at the far end was taller than the rest, It was the king's. The chamberlain moved quickly to place a cushion on the seat. The king entered and walked slowly down the hall, his footsteps the only sound. The other men were already seated. They stood as he passed, not in a rush, not with noise, just slowly, with respect. He nodded once. They sat again. He reached his chair, turned and sat. The chamberlain stepped forward and placed a folded paper in front of him. Then he bowed and stepped back. The king opened the paper and read the list of 10 items for the morning: land disputes, grain supplies, tax letters, noble guests arriving in 3 days, one priest asking for more candles. The king blinked slowly. He folded the paper again and placed it beside the candle on the table. He looked up. The meeting began with no word, just a long pause. Then the first noble spoke, his voice low and slow. Each man took his turn. No one argued. They simply spoke their piece and waited. Outside, the sun had now risen fully, but the windows in the council hall were too small to show it. Inside, the king listened, not just with his ears but with his face. His eyebrows moved slightly. His hand stayed still on the table. His mouth barely changed shape. He had done this before, many, many times. Still, every day was different, and the day had only just begun. The room was colder now, not because the fire had gone out. There was no fire in the council hall, but because the kind of quiet it held made the air feel heavier. The walls were thick stone, tall and gray, and the windows were too small to let much warmth in. Even when the sun was up, the king leaned slightly back in his chair. It was carved from old oak and creaked just a little whenever he shifted his weight. His hands rested flat on the long table. Fingers spread, calm. Around him the other men spoke slowly, one at a time. They didn't raise their voices. They didn't rush. Each man said what he had to say, and then waited. It was the way things had always been done here. There were 12 of them in total. Lords, stewards, scribes, one priest and the king's master of grain. Each had a place around the table, marked by a small wooden nameplate and a folded cloth to rest their elbows on. No one wrote. Only the king's scribe, who sat on a small stool behind him, moved his quill gently over parchment. The soft scratching sound barely noticeable beneath the low voices. The walls were lined with tapestries to help hold in the warmth. One showed a lion, standing with one paw raised. Another showed a map of the nearby lands, painted in dull reds, greens, and browns. The map was old. Some of the rivers on it had long dried up. Some villages had vanished from the earth, but remained stitched into the fabric. One man finished speaking. The room fell silent again. Then the king turned his head slightly. His chamberlain stepped forward. "Who's next?" the king asked. The chamberlain bowed his head. "Sir Albin, my lord. He wishes to speak about the grain storage." The man called Sir Albin had small eyes and a very thin neck. He cleared his throat before speaking. "My king," he began, "the eastern silos are nearly full. Last month's rain was kind to us. The harvest is good." The king nodded once, but Sir Albin added, "The barrels are leaking again." The king's brow furrowed only a little. "The same barrels we replaced last winter?" "Yes, my lord." The king didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked toward the far corner of the room, where a servant stood quietly holding a basket of scrolls. "Have them inspected," the king said, "and give me a name. Who carved them?" "I shall find out," Sir Albin said, bowing slightly. The meeting moved on. Next came news from the northern road. A small bridge had collapsed. It wasn't a war or a battle, just a quiet little bridge that had been ignored too long. Now it had fallen, and merchants had to walk their wagons through a stream. The priest nodded solemnly and said it might be a sign. The king didn't argue, but he didn't agree either. He simply said, "Send a carpenter, and send oats to the merchants' horses." Then came talk of guests. 3 nobles were expected in 5 days. One was a cousin, one was a man the king didn't care for. The third was a bishop who never smiled. The king sighed gently, not loud, just a soft breath through his nose. "I'll host them," he said, "but not at supper." The chamberlain scribbled a note. That meant they'd be served in the east wing, a separate table, smaller plates, less ceremony. And so the meeting continued. Each topic felt small, but together they weighed heavily, like tiny stones placed one by one into a large basket. At first you barely notice the weight, but after an hour, your arms begin to tire. That's how the king felt. His neck grew stiff, his fingers tapped lightly on the wood. Tick, tick. No one said anything about it. At last the chamberlain cleared his throat. "My lord, we are finished." The king looked at him for a moment, then stood. The other men rose quickly, heads bowed. Their chairs scraped the floor in slow patterns of sound. The king gave a slight nod, turned and left the hall. Outside the council hall, the hallway felt different now, warmer, brighter. A shaft of sunlight had found its way through one of the narrow windows, landing on the floor like a golden ribbon. A dust mote drifted in it, spinning gently. The king walked slowly, his hands behind his back, down a small set of steps, across a quiet courtyard, and into a shorter hallway that smelled faintly of old paper and beeswax. This was the letter hall, and it was here the king now spent the next part of his day. Inside were shelves, rows and rows of rolled-up letters, scrolls and flat wooden tablets. Some were tied with string, others sealed with wax. There were shelves for local letters, foreign ones, messages from merchants, and messages from abbots. The oldest scrolls had labels written in faded ink. Some labels had curled up, flaking away. Others had been rewritten, the new words pressed over the old like a whispered argument. A man sat at a desk in the corner, the king's scribe. His beard was long, and his fingers stained with ink. He looked up as the king entered. "My liege," he said. The king nodded. "What's new?" The scribe shuffled through a few scrolls. 2 letters from the wet, one from your sister, and one strange request from a miller. "A miller?" "Yes, my lord. He wants permission to dam a stream, says it'll power a second wheel." The king raised an eyebrow. "What does the priest say?" "He says it'll drown the graveyard." The king paused. "Send them a message. Tell them to wait." The scribe nodded. The king stepped to the center of the room. He looked at the shelves, not reading, just letting his eyes drift over the wax seals and bits of ribbon. He reached for a scroll tied with black string. It was from another kingdom, a far one. He unrolled it slowly. The paper crackled. The handwriting was neat but sharp, as if the writer had been in a hurry. It spoke of a marriage proposal. The king read it twice, then handed it back. "Let it wait," he said. He left the letter hall. Outside, a servant waited with a fur-lined cloak. The king had started to feel the cold again. He pulled it around his shoulders and walked toward the outer walkway of the castle. Here the wind blew gently through open arches, carrying the scent of the kitchen below. Onions, cooked beef and something sweeter, pears maybe. From this high walkway, the king could see the training yard, the stables, the stone tower where the grain was kept. He could see smoke rising from chimneys, birds hopping across the roof tiles, and the far hills that curved gently into the distance. He rested one hand on the stone edge, and leaned slightly. A single cloud drifted across the sky, slow and soft. Behind him the chamberlain arrived again. "My king, there is the matter of the confessor." The king turned. "Now, if it pleases you." The king sighed again, nodding once. The confessor was already waiting in a side room, a man in a brown robe, clean face, eyes quiet. He didn't smile. He never did. He bowed deeply as the king entered. They sat across from each other. A small wooden table stood between them. On it lay a candle, a bowl of dried figs, and a knife. The king didn't speak first. The confessor did. "There is a matter of silence, my lord." "What kind?" A page heard something, near the courtyard gate. He spoke of it to the steward. The king closed his eyes for a moment. What was said? A servant, complaining, saying your hunts are too long, that you waste food. The king's fingers tapped the table, and that same servant has gone, vanished before dawn, took nothing with him, just gone. The king didn't answer. The confessor waited. At last, the king said, "Send word to the steward, tell him no more fires in the guest kitchens for a week." The confessor nodded. They sat in silence for a while longer. Then the king stood and left. Outside the light had changed again. The day had moved forward by hours. Shadows were now cast on the opposite walls. The castle breathed slowly, in and out, just like There were still many hours left in the day, but the rhythm of the castle remained the same, quiet, orderly, predictable, and very, very slow. The hallways were even quieter now. The king moved alone, walking through the older parts of the castle. This section smelled of dust and oil from torches that hadn't burned in weeks. The stone here was darker, marked by long lines that showed where carts or barrels had once scraped past. The air felt cool, not cold, just still, like a room that held its breath. The king's boots made soft sounds as he stepped over worn floor stones. He knew this path well. He had walked it many times, but still it felt different today. Maybe the silence was thicker. Or maybe the echoes had changed shape. The castle was like that. It had moods. Some days it felt open and bright. Other days it felt like it was hiding something in its corners. He passed under a narrow arch where a small crack in the stone let a single beam of sunlight fall in. The light landed on the floor like a coin. The king stopped there. He looked down at the light and reached out his hand. His fingers entered the golden glow. Tiny dust bits floated in the air, moving slowly. The sound of footsteps came from behind. A boy's voice called out gently, "My lord." The king turned. It was a young page, barely 12. His hair was messy, and his cheeks were pink from running. He held something wrapped in cloth. "The barber is ready," he said. "He waits near the garden steps." The king nodded. The page turned and began to walk back the way he came. The king followed, his cloak brushing the walls. Soon they reached the door that led out to the castle's small garden. A quiet space hidden between tall stone walls. The door creaked a little as it opened, revealing a patch of green. It wasn't a large garden, just a square of grass, some low bushes, and a bench carved from a single piece of oak. In the far corner stood the barber. He wore a long brown coat and held a small wooden box in his hands. He bowed low as the king approached. "My lord," he said softly, "I'm at your service." The king sat on the bench, his back straight. The air smelled of damp leaves and old stone. A bird chirped once in the distance, then fell quiet. The barber opened his box. Inside were combs, scissors, a blade wrapped in cloth, and a small jar of thick cream. He dipped a cloth into a nearby bowl of water, wrung it out, and gently pressed it to the king's face. The water was warm and smelled faintly of rosemary. The king closed his eyes for a moment. The heat sank into his skin. The barber worked slowly. First he trimmed the king's beard with small shears, snipping carefully, collecting the clippings in a cloth. Then he used the cream and blade to clean the edges near the neck. Scrape, scrape, pause, scrape, scrape. Each stroke of the blade was quiet but precise. The king barely moved. His eyes stayed half closed. The breeze pushed through the bushes softly. A leaf drifted to the ground near his boot. Next came his hair. It was not long, but it needed shaping. The barber combed it back, trimmed the sides, and checked his work with every snip. The king didn't speak. Neither did the barber. It was an hour made for silence. When it was done, the barber bowed again and backed away. The king stood, brushing a few loose hairs from his shoulder. The air now felt fresher, his skin cooler, his head lighter. He stepped back into the castle. Just as he entered the stone corridor again, a thin bell rang somewhere deep in the walls. It was not loud, not sharp, just a single soft chime. That sound meant only one thing. It was time to eat. He made his way toward the great hall, where the midday meal would be served. The walk was long, passing through wide archways and under chandeliers made from twisted iron. Torches burned low on either side. The flames made the shadows dance on the walls like slow-moving ghosts. Two servants opened the tall wooden doors of the hall. Inside, the long table had already been set. The hall was not fancy. It was large, yes, but simple. The stone walls were bare except for a few woven hangings. One with the king's crest, one with a hunting scene, one showing a dragon that no one believed was real. The wooden floor had been swept clean. A fire burned in the large hearth. On the far wall, its smoke curling up through a hole in the ceiling. The table stretched from one end of the room to the other. It was made from dark wood, polished smooth by years of elbows and plate. Along each side sat chairs, high-backed for nobles, plain stools for servants and guests. The king's seat was in the center of one long side, not at the head, but in the middle. That way he could speak to both ends of the table without turning his body. Plates were brought in, wooden ones, round and plain, cups made of horn, spoons of pewter, no forks. Forks were not yet common. Most food was eaten with fingers or with small knives each person carried at their side. The first course was thick slices, rough on the edges, warm in the center. It had been baked with barley and oats. A small bowl of salted butter sat nearby. The king took a piece, dipped it in the butter and chewed slowly. Next came fish, river trout, cooked with herbs and placed on a platter of leaves. The fish had been caught that morning by one of the kitchen boys. It was soft and flaky. The smell was earthy, not strong. Then came boiled carrots, turnips, and onions, all from the castle garden. They had been cooked slowly, their colors muted, their shapes soft. Servants moved between the tables quietly. They didn't speak unless spoken to. They refilled cups with watered wine and cleared plates, only when eyes were no longer on them. The sound of the meal was soft, chairs scraping gently, cups clinking, the low hum of conversation, no shouting, no laughter, just slow words, spoken between bites. A noble beside the king leaned in. "My lord, the new cook has added cinnamon to the apples." The king chewed a slice of baked apple. "Not at once. Not bad," he said. The dessert was plain but good. Stewed apples with a touch of honey, a thin crust of pastry on top. It melted slowly in the mouth. The meal ended with a small cup of warm ale. Afterwards, the king sat for a while, not speaking. He simply looked at the fire across the room. The logs popped now and then. A bit of ash floated up the chimney. His hands rested on the arms of the chair. His shoulders relaxed. One by one, the other diners stood and bowed before leaving. The king remained. Then slowly he stood too. The next part of the day was quiet. No meetings, no letters, no command, just walking. And so he did. Through the garden paths, under arches, across the stone courtyards. His boots brushed against fallen leaves. A few petals from the flowers near the walls clung to the folds of his robe. He reached out once and touched the soft leaves of a lavender bush. His fingers rubbed gently. The scent stayed on his hand. Down near the edge of the castle walls he paused. A small cat appeared, gray, thin, with bright eyes. It rubbed against his leg. He looked down at it. He didn't say more, just let it follow him for a while. Then it turned and ran off, chasing something invisible across the stone path. The king smiled for the first time that day, but only for a moment. He walked on, through the old gatehouse, where the rust on the hinges creaked faintly, and into a shaded passage where moss grew on the stones. The light dimmed again. The castle wrapped around him once more, and the day continued. Past the shaded passage, the castle began to open up again. The king stepped into a long corridor, filled with soft light coming through high-arched windows. Dust floated in the sunbeams like tiny silver feathers, turning slowly, as if dancing without music. The walls here were smoother, painted once long ago, though the colors had faded into pale browns and grays. A line of wooden benches stood along one side, each carved with symbols, stars, lions, branches, and keys. This was the east wing of the castle. It led toward one of the older towers, the one where the armories were kept. The king had not gone there in many days, but today something in him wanted to walk that way. Not because of war. There was no war today, just the quiet pull of old habits. He turned down a narrow stairwell. The stone steps dipped slightly in the center, worn smooth by centuries of boots and sandals. The torches along the wall were unlit, but the air held the smell of old iron and dry leather. The armory door stood tall, made of heavy oak with black iron bands running across it. No guards stood here. There was no need. The weapons inside were not dangerous now. They were heavy, yes, sharp sometimes, but they belonged to history more than to today. The king pushed the door gently. It creaked open. Inside, the room was large, round, and filled with quiet. Wooden racks stood against every wall, holding swords, shields, spears, and helmets. Each item had its place. Nothing leaned. Nothing was crooked. The air was dry and still, with only the faintest scent of oil and metal. The king walked slowly between the rows. He reached out and touched a shield. Its surface was dull, marked with scratches from long-ago battles. His fingers moved over the pattern, an old crest no longer used. A lion with wings. He remembered the man who once carried a knight who laughed too loud and always brought 2 spoons to dinner. He moved to the next row. Here hung chainmail shirts, folded over thick wooden bars. The metal links clinked softly. As he brushed past them, they were cold to the touch even through the thin gloves he wore. Heavy too. It was hard to imagine running in one, let alone fighting. In a corner of the armory, a small window let in a sliver of light. Dust swirled in the beam, landing gently on a pile of old helmets. The king picked one up. It was smaller than he expected, light, plain with a rounded top and a narrow nose guard. Inside, bits of cloth still clung to the edges where it once rubbed against a man's brow. He turned it slowly in his hands. Then quietly, he placed it back down. Near the center of the room stood a tall cabinet. It was locked, but the king had the key. He reached into his robe, pulled out a thin silver key, and inserted it into the lock. Click. The door swung open. Inside on velvet cloth lay 3 swords. One belonged to his father, one to his grandfather, one to a knight who had saved him many years ago. He looked at them one by one. The first was thick with a heavy hilt. Its blade was chipped near the tip from a battle fought near the river bend. The second was longer, thinner, perfectly balanced. It had never seen blood. It had been made as a gift, but never used. The third had a nick near the guard. The king ran his finger gently along it, careful not to cut himself. He stood there a long while, not thinking, not remembering, just feeling the silence. He closed the cabinet gently, turned the key, and slipped it back into his robe. Then he walked out, back up the stairs, down the hall, into the newer parts of the castle where the sounds of the world began to return. Voices in the distance, the shuffle of boots, a door creaking open and shut. A servant passed him, carrying a basket of apples. The apples were red and soft-looking, not for storage, for eating today. The servant bowed low. The king nodded, not slowing his step. He moved toward the outer balcony. This was a place he liked. It wasn't used for ceremonies or meetings. It wasn't grand, just a simple stretch of stone, overlooking the lower courtyard. A place to breathe. He stepped outside. The air smelled of sunlight on old stone, warm and dry. The wind moved gently through the narrow space, carrying the sound of distant chickens and the clang of a smith's hammer far below. He leaned on the wall, folding his arms over the stone ledge. Below, the world moved slowly. A boy led 2 goats along the dirt path. A woman scrubbed something in a bucket. A guard adjusted his helmet and yawned. The king watched, not as a ruler, just as a man. From this height he could see the far fields beyond the castle walls. Rows of barley, almost ready for harvest. A line of trees at the edge of the river, the glitter of water moving gently between them. He stayed like that for a long time. Then he heard footsteps again, soft, but measured. He turned. It was the royal falconer, a tall man with a thin nose and a patchy gray beard. He carried a leather glove, worn smooth by years of use, and on that glove sat a bird. A falcon with dark eyes and feathers, the color of smoke and silver. "My lord," the falconer said. The king held out his arm. The man carefully transferred the bird. The falcon shifted once, its claws gripping the leather of the king's glove. Then it settled. The king looked at it. The bird looked back, its head tilted slightly. For a moment, they just stared at each other. Then the king raised his arm. The falcon stretched its wings, and then whoosh it flew upward into the sky. A sudden flash of movement that caught the sun on its feathers. The king watched it circle, farther, higher, until it was just a dark speck against the blue. The falconer bowed and stepped back. The king lowered his arm. He didn't he just turned slowly and walked back inside the castle. The corridors had changed again. The light was different now, softer, warmer. He passed a servant polishing a brass candle holder, another one sweeping bits of hay from a doorway. Everyone moved slowly, calmly. It was the rhythm of the castle, the rhythm of the king's day. Stillness, sound, stillness again. The next place he went was quiet once more, a room behind a heavy curtain. The king pushed it aside and stepped into a small chamber lit only by 2 candles and a narrow window. It was the chamber of the royal barber surgeon, not the same man who had trimmed his beard earlier. This one was different. His job wasn't to clean the outside of the king, but to check his body from within, to press the skin, to tap the chest, to ask quiet questions. The man placed a hand on the king's wrist, feeling his pulse. He touched his forehead, pressed near his stomach, asked about his breathing. The king answered with short words, yes, no, fine. He was given a cup of something bitter, made from boiled roots and crushed seeds. He drank it without flinching. Then he stood. The barber surgeon bowed. The king left. The hall was darker now, not yet night, but the sun was sinking low. The shadows stretched longer along the floor. Candles had been lit in some places. In others, only the fading daylight touched the stones. The king's footsteps echoed gently, not loud, not fast, just the sound of another hour passing. The hallway near the west tower was different from the others. Its stones were darker, not because of dirt or age, but because they had once been part of an older castle. One that stood before this one was laid on top of it. The ceiling was lower, and the floor dipped slightly in the middle, like a path that too many feet had followed over too many years. The torches here burned smaller, and their flames flickered more, casting long, shaky shadows across the walls. The king walked slowly, his hand brushing lightly against the cold stone. He liked this hallway, not because it was grand, not because it was quiet, but because it reminded him of things he didn't have to talk about, things he could feel in his bones, like old winters and old thoughts. At the end of the hallway was a door, plain wood, no carvings, no iron bands, just wood. He opened it without knocking. Inside was the royal school chamber. It wasn't used often, not now, but years ago this is where the prince had been taught, reading, writing, speaking, listening. The old lessons still lived in the wood of the benches, in the marks left behind on the chalkboards, and in the smell of ink and dust. The room had a narrow window, with a deep stone sill. On it sat 3 books, their covers thick with leather and buckles of brass. The king walked over, and placed his hand on the middle one. He didn't open it, he just felt the rough texture of the leather beneath his palm. Then he turned and looked around the room. The long bench where the boys once sat was still there, the table where the tutor once stood, a stool with one leg shorter than the rest. Every corner held something old, a basket of dry ink pots, a broken slate, a cracked globe with no color left on its surface. The king walked slowly to the bench. He sat. The wood creaked a little beneath him. He closed his eyes for a moment. Then he opened them and looked at the spot near the wall where his son once dropped his writing quill. Every day, always at the same moment, always on purpose. Clink. He could almost hear it. The echo still lived there. On the floor nearby was a square of old cloth. It had been part of a banner once, one used in a lesson about family crests. Faded gold thread showed the shape of a tree, its branches reaching wide. The king bent down, picked it up, and turned it in his hand. He tucked it into the sleeve of his robe. Not to keep, just for now. Outside, the bell in the south tower rang twice. That meant 2 hours until nightfall. The king stood and left the room. He walked back through the narrow hallway, each step soft and steady. The shadows had changed again. Longer now. Deeper. The torches flickered like they were nervous. The stone felt cooler under his boots. He turned left at the next corner, then right, then down a short stairwell, and finally into the part of the castle few ever entered without invitation. The royal library. The door to the library was tall and arched, made of a lighter wood than most others in the castle. It had no handle, just a thick iron ring. The king pulled it slowly. Creak. Inside, the library smelled of old parchment, beeswax and time. Shelves lined the walls, reaching from floor to ceiling. Ladders leaned against them at sharp angles. Candles burned in glass lamps, hung high from chains in the beams above. Their light glowed warm and golden, soft enough not to hurt the eyes, bright enough to read by. Books rested on every surface, opened, closed, rolled into scrolls, stacked in small towers. Some looked freshly written, ink still dark and neat. Others were cracked at the spine, their pages thin as dried leaves. The king moved slowly between the shelves. He didn't look for anything special. He just let his fingers run along the bindings. Rough leather, soft cloth, some with gold lines, some plain, some so old the titles had disappeared. He stopped at one shelf, near the bottom, pulled out a small book with a wooden cover, opened it. Inside were drawings, simple ones, done in black ink, tools, horses, bread, a castle. He smiled softly. It was a book made for children. He turned a few pages. Each one showed a drawing with a word underneath. He read them slowly. Stone, shield, fire. He closed the book and placed it on the table. Then he sat. The chair near the table was wide and low, padded with a thin cushion and covered in a soft woolen cloth. He leaned back slightly, resting his hands on his knees. He looked around the room. He liked this room. No one asked him questions here. No one expected him to decide anything. Just him, and the books, and the quiet. After a long while, the king stood again. He chose a scroll from a nearby basket, and tucked it under his arm. He left the library, pulling the door shut behind him. As he walked back into the main hallway, the air felt thicker now. The sun was nearly gone. Only a faint orange line stretched across the high windows. The rest was blue, then purple, then almost black. The day was slipping away. The castle was changing again. Lanterns were being lit, torches replaced, doors closed, shutters pulled tight. The night was coming, and with it a different rhythm, a slower one, more careful, more quiet. The king continued his walk, heading toward his private chamber once again. The servants along the hallway moved even more gently now. Their voices dropped, their steps became whispers. The castle, which had once woken with creaking boots and barking dogs, was now humming softly, like an old lullaby with no words. The king reached his chamber and stepped inside. The fire had been built again, fresh logs, a warm, glowing flame. The bed was still untouched, but a robe had been laid out, dark blue, soft, the same one he wore every evening. He sat at his table near the hearth, the scroll still tucked under his arm. He placed it on the table and unrolled it. The handwriting was shaky, an old letter, written to him many years ago. He read the first line slowly. My son. He stopped, closed the scroll, pushed it aside. The fire crackled quietly. The shadows on the walls danced once again, but slower now. Everything was slower now. The flames in the hearth burned low, casting warm flickers of light across the stone floor. The soft crackle of firewood breaking apart filled the room, sometimes with a small pop, sometimes just with a gentle hiss. The king sat still in his chair, watching the orange glow move along the old stones like slow water. His hands were resting on the arms of the chair, one finger tapping lightly, every few seconds, like a heartbeat. Outside, through the tall slit of a window, the sky had turned dark. A single star could be seen, then another, and another. Slowly, more stars joined the sky, like tiny white candles lit one at a time in a deep blue room. The king stood and walked to the window. He leaned slightly forward, resting his hand against the cool edge of the stone. His breath made a small patch of fog on the glass. He didn't wipe it away. He just looked through it. Far below, the castle grounds were quiet. No carriages moved. No voices called out. Just a soft rustling of trees in the distance, and the steady rhythm of a night breeze moving past stone walls. A torch on the far gate flickered and bent sideways as the wind passed by. Behind the king, the room was still warm. The fire's glow danced on the wooden beams above. Shadows grew longer with every passing minute. A lantern had been lit near the door, its small flame making a soft halo of gold on the wall. On the table beside the bed, a tray had been placed. It held a bowl of broth, a small piece of bread, and a cup of warm milk. Steam curled slowly from the top of the cup, twisting in the air like ribbon. He turned and walked over. The broth was thin but full of soft smells. Onions, herbs, a bit of garlic. He picked up a spoon and stirred gently, then took a slow sip. It was just right. Not too hot, not too cold, not full of flavor. Just enough to feel something. Something warm, something familiar. He took a second sip, then another. The spoon moved slowly, no rush. The bread sat on the edge of the tray, thick, with a rough crust. He tore off a small piece, dipped it into the broth, let it soak, and then placed it in his mouth. He chewed softly, swallowed. He did it again, then again. After a while, the tray was empty. He placed the spoon down. The cup of milk was still warm. He lifted it with both hands and held it close to his chest for a moment. The warmth reached his fingers, then his wrists, then his shoulders. He took a sip. The milk was sweetened with a little honey, and maybe a pinch of cinnamon. His lips pressed against the edge of the cup again. Another sip, then another. His eyes felt heavier now, but not tired, just soft. He stood and walked to the far end of the room where a small wooden chest sat beside the wall. It had iron corners, and a faded design on the lid, something shaped like a sun, though the paint was mostly gone now. He knelt beside it, opened it slowly. Inside were small things, not coins, not gems, just memories. A broken wooden whistle, a woolen glove too small for his hand, a folded letter with no name on it, a lock of hair tied with string. He didn't touch them, he just looked, then closed the chest again. He stood brushing his hands against his robe. He walked to the center of the room and stood there for a long time, listening, not to voices, not to wind, just to the quiet that lives between sounds. He stepped over to the wall where the old sword hung, not a sword of war, not one of gold, just plain steel. His hand touched the hilt. His fingers curled around it for a second, then he let go. He stepped back, turned and walked toward the window again. The stars were many now. They filled the sky like a field of lanterns. He looked up, took a deep breath through his nose, closed his eyes, exhaled slowly. He could hear the fire behind him, the small crackles, the occasional soft thump as a log settled deeper into the embers. He could feel the heat on the back of his neck, and the cool air from the window on his cheeks. He stood still. The room held him like a blanket. After a while the door opened gently. A servant entered without speaking. He carried nothing. He simply walked to the bed, checked the blankets, fluffed a pillow and then turned. He bowed, then left. The king didn't move yet. He looked once more at the star, then at the lantern by the door. He reached up and turned the flame lower. The room dimmed. He moved toward the bed, each step quiet, each movement slow. He sat on the edge first, pulled the covers back, ran his hand over the cool sheet, then lifted his legs and lay down, his head pressed into the pillow. The fire continued to burn, softer now, like breathing. The blanket settled over his chest. The shadows on the ceiling stretched across like long arms. He stared at them, not thinking, just watching. The sound of the castle faded more and more. Fewer footsteps, fewer creaks, just the soft groan of old wood adjusting to the cool of the night, and the quiet sound of sleep all around him. The king closed his eyes, but he didn't fall asleep yet. He let his thoughts drift like leaves floating down a river. Not heavy thought, not loud ones, just small ones, like the smell of bread, the sound of water in a basin, the way his robe felt on his shoulders, the little cat in the courtyard, the falcon in the sky, the tiny crack in the shield from long ago, the name he almost said. He didn't speak, just let it pass, and let the night continue. The room was so quiet now. Even the fire sounded softer than before. It no longer popped or cracked loudly. Instead it made slow little sighs like it was tired too. The flames leaned gently to one side, flickering a soft yellow, casting dancing shadows on the stone walls and wooden beams above. The king stayed in bed, eyes half closed, body still under the thick covers. The pillow under his head was not soft, but it was shaped just right. He'd used it for many years. It remembered the shape of his neck, the way he lay at night, the curve of his shoulder. He moved a little to one side, then back, then stayed still. His breathing was slow, not deep, not shallow, just steady, like waves that move in and out without rush. Outside the wind passed softly against the stone wall. Sometimes it made a low whistle as it moved across the corners of the tower. Sometimes it didn't. Sometimes it was just a feeling in the room, a cool edge to the air, a faint sound that wasn't really a sound. Inside the chamber the air was warmer, holding the scent of burned wood, melted wax, and old wool. The king opened his eyes again, only a little. The firelight reflected in his eyes, two tiny golden sparks. He turned his head on the pillow and looked at the door. It was closed, but not locked. He could hear nothing on the other side. No servants walking past, no guards talking, just the silence of night. His fingers moved under the blanket, brushing against the soft linen shirt he wore. His hand found the edge of the sheet and held it loose. He rubbed the cloth between his thumb and fingers. It was smooth, worn down by many wash. It smelled of herbs, maybe lavender or rosemary. Someone had placed dried flowers between the folded fabric again. They always did. He looked up at the wooden beams above, each one carved and polished, each one shaped to fit perfectly. No cracks, no holes, just lines of wood, stretching across the ceiling like the ribs of a sleeping animal. He followed the lines with his eyes, from one end of the room to the other, back and forth. He shifted slightly under the cover, not to sleep, just to feel the fabric against his legs. He could hear the ticking of something now. Not a clock. There were no clocks in this part of the castle. It was the drip of water, somewhere far away. A slow drip, a pause, then another, like time itself saying still here, still passing. The king turned onto his side. Now he faced the fire. Its light was lower now. The wood had burned down halfway. The bright flames were smaller, just little tongues of light, dancing along black logs. The sound was softer too, like a whisper. He watched the fire, not thinking, just watching. His fingers pressed into the blanket a little. His knees bent slightly under the covers. He pulled the blanket up to his chin, not because of the cold, just for comfort. Near the foot of the bed a soft creak, then a thump. The door had opened. Slowly, a servant stepped inside. No words, just a quiet bow. He walked softly across the stone floor, each footstep a hush. He carried something, a warm cloth, and a small bowl. He placed them gently on the table near the fire, then turned. He looked at the king, bowed again and stepped out. The door closed with a small click. The king didn't speak. He didn't need to. That servant came every night, at the same time, with the same cloth. The bowl held oil for dry hands. He'd never asked for it, but someone had once, and the habit remained. He lay still, thinking of nothing and everything at once. The cloth, the oil, the servant's soft feet, the quiet click of the door, the low hiss of the fire, the gentle pull of the blanket at his shoulder, the scent of ash and wool. His eyes closed again, just for a moment, then opened. The flame flickered lower. He could see the coals now, red and black, like a breathing heart. They pulsed every now and then, soft glows that faded and came back, not quickly, just gently, like they didn't want to be noticed. But the king reached out his hand, slowly, and touched the wooden edge of the bed. His fingers traced a small dent there, a place worn smooth by years of use. He pressed his thumb into it, held it there, then let go. A sound outside, not loud, not sharp, just the soft rustle of leaves. The wind had changed again. Maybe a tree near the wall was moving, maybe not. Maybe it was only the wind's fingers brushing the edge of the stone. A memory drifted through his head, not strong, not clear, just a soft shape. A boy running across a field, a dog barking far away, a slice of warm bread, the feel of sunlight on his hair. Then it was gone. He blinked, looked at the coals again. They were smaller now, still glowing, still breathing, but slower. A few ashes drifted upward, then fell. He turned onto his back again, looked at the ceiling once more, then at the curtain that hung near the wall. It moved slightly, just once, then stopped. The room was still. He listened for the sound of the wind again. It didn't come. He waited, still nothing, just the small sound of his breath. In, out, in, out. He looked at the cup on the table near the bed. There was still a little milk left. He reached for it slowly, lifted it to his lips, drank. It was cool now, but still sweet. He placed it back down, carefully, no sound. Then he lowered his arm again, placed his hand on his chest, felt the rise and fall, felt the blanket above it, felt the softness below it, felt the room around him, felt the quiet, felt the peace. He closed his eyes, not for sleep, just to listen, to feel the night, to let it wrap around him like the blanket, to hold it, and be held. The wind moved again, slow and careful, brushing past the high window like a soft hand sliding over cool glass. The stars outside had grown brighter now. The sky above the castle was deep black, with more whites than before. Some blinked, some stood still. The moon was not in the sky tonight, only stars. Quiet stars, that watched everything from far, far away. The king was still in bed, lying flat now, both arms resting on top of the thick blanket. His eyes were open just a little. The room was nearly dark. Only the last bit of glow from the fire remained. The logs were now black shapes, and the red coals underneath gave off a low red light, dull and steady. The room did not feel cold. It felt still like a pond on a windless night. Outside, a soft sound came and went. A piece of loose cloth on a flagpole flapped once, then stopped. Somewhere deep in the castle, a door creaked, then silence again. A bird made a sound near the roof. Just one. Not a call, just a sound. Then nothing. The king turned his head on the pillow to face the window again. A small cloud moved across the sky, covering a few stars. It looked like smoke, but moved slower. He watched it float by until it disappeared. The stars came back. His body was warm under the blanket, but his face felt the chill of the night air. He liked it. The difference in temperature between his cheeks and his chest made him feel real, like the night hadn't swallowed him fully yet. A flicker near the hearth. A small piece of wood shifted. A quiet click, then it stopped. The flame had gone out now. All that remained were the coals. Even they were smaller. Just a few red spots glowing like tiny eyes. He stared at them for a long time. One blinked out, then another, then one came back, brighter for just a second, before fading again. His right hand moved slowly, reached over the blanket, and rested near the edge of the bed. He let his fingers hang loosely off the side. They didn't touch the floor, they just floated in the air. He could feel the difference in space, open, empty, invisible. His hand stayed like that, Still, he blinked slowly. His eyes stayed closed for a moment longer this time, then opened. He looked at the candle near the table. It had gone out too, nothing but the dark shape of the holder now. The lantern by the door gave off a very soft glow, very faint, enough to see the wall behind it. Nothing more. He turned back toward the ceiling. The beams above were almost invisible now, just shadows on shadows. Only the shapes remained, faint lines stretching from one wall to the other. He followed them with his eyes, but it felt like watching fog, soft, blurry, slow. His breathing made a small sound in the room now, just a whisper of air in and out, a steady rhythm, not tired, not rushed, just slow, like everything else. The king let his head turn gently to the left again. He looked at the little wooden chest near the wall. He could barely see it now, just its outline. He knew what was inside, but he didn't need to touch it again. He had already held those memories tonight, already let them speak. They had been quiet, but clear. He closed his eyes again. This time they stayed closed longer, not because he was trying to sleep, just because the darkness behind them felt softer than the room. A place where no light flickered, no wind moved, no sounds crept in, just stillness. Then something shifted, not in the room, not in the castle, but inside him, a kind of calmness that came not from being still but from being ready, the kind of peace that comes after a long walk, when you reach the top of a hill, and you stop, and you breathe, and nothing moves, nothing pushes, nothing pulls, just air, and sky, and space. He breathed in again, held it for a second, then let it out slowly. His chest rose and fell under the blanket. The warmth of the wool pressed lightly against him. His fingers moved gently under the fabric, touched the edge of the sheet, tucked it closer, then stopped. He didn't open his eyes again, didn't need to. The room was quiet, the world was quiet, the castle was breathing in time with him now. Every old stone, every wooden beam, every torch holder, every thread in the blanket, they were all part of the same quiet rhythm, a slow hum of peace that wrapped around him like another blanket. The bed didn't creak, the wind didn't push, the fire didn't crackle, even the coals had dimmed more, their red light now barely there, but not gone, just smaller, softer, like everything else. The king's lips parted slightly, not to speak, not to sigh, just to feel the air move. His throat made no sound, his jaw relaxed, his shoulders settled deeper into the mattress. He didn't think of tomorrow, or yesterday, or anything, just now, just here, just this. His body felt heavy and warm, his mind light and slow, floating, not dreaming, not waking, just floating. He stayed that way, still, breathing, not asleep, not awake, but something close to both, and the night went on. The sky outside the castle had turned completely black, deep and smooth like ink poured across the heavens. The stars still blinked gently above, but now fewer could be seen. A thin layer of cloud had begun to move in soft, slow, like white fog in a far-off dream. The air outside had cooled more. It moved differently now, not fast, not loud, just heavier. The castle's stone walls drank it in and held the chill close. Inside, the king's room was quiet. The fire had gone out completely. No more glow, no more coals, just cold ash resting where the flames had once danced. The hearth was dark, like the inside of a closed eye. The room felt thicker now, but not uncomfortable, just still, like it was holding its breath. The king lay in bed, barely moving. His body sunk deeper into the mattress, pressing gently into the straw-filled layers. His arms rested by his sides now, not tucked, stretched, just placed. His palms faced down, hidden under the warm weight of the blanket. The blanket itself felt heavier than it did before, not in weight, but in presence. It was like a large hand resting gently over him, protective, calm, full of memory. The fabric smelled faintly of wood smoke, old herbs, and something softer, something like wool warmed by skin. His breathing was so slow now, it made no sound at all. Only the rising and falling of the blanket gave away the rhythm of his chest. In, pause, out, then stillness, then again. He had not spoken for hours. There was nothing to say, and no one to say it to. His eyelids were closed, but not tight. He was not asleep, but he was not fully awake either. His mind floated somewhere between the two, like a feather caught in a soft breeze. Thoughts passed through his head, like soft shadows. No names, no faces, just colors and feelings and distant shapes. A bell far across the castle rang once, a low, round sound, then silence again. That bell only rang once every night, not to wake anyone, not to warn, just to remind the guards to change. It meant nothing to the king now, but it still moved through the air and touched his ears. He heard it, then forgot it. Outside the window, a light mist had begun to rise from the earth. It drifted across the fields, slipping around trees and over stones. It moved like breath, folding and unfolding, then folding again. It touched the castle walls like soft fabric. The torch on the outer gate flickered, trying to stay alive. Its flame bent sideways, thinned, and then stood straight again. Down in the garden below the king's chamber, a leaf fell from one of the trees. It twirled slowly in the air, drifting this way and that, like it couldn't decide where to land. It finally came to rest on a patch of damp soil, next to a patch of old stone. In the stable, a horse shifted in its sleep, hoof against wood, a quiet thump, then stillness. Back in the king's room, the shadows had settled completely. The lantern near the door had dimmed down to almost nothing. Its flame was so small now, it looked like a star had fallen and was resting behind that. The little glow made a tiny circle of light on the floor, no bigger than the top of a plate. Everything else was dark, but not scary, just quiet, just deep, just heavy, like the earth. The king's head turned slightly on the pillow, not quickly, just enough for his cheek to rest on the cooler side. He stayed that way. The pillow had become flat over time, shaped by his weight. It no longer offered support, it simply followed his shape. It held his head, the way soft sand holds a footprint. The mattress beneath him creaked once, a low, tired sound, then silence again. The room smelled of ash, linen, and the faintest hint of dried mint, a scent left behind by the herbs in his robe pocket. He remembered it, faintly. It brought no memory, just a feeling, a small soft sense of calm. He let it stay. From outside, a thin breeze slipped through a crack in the stone. It was so narrow, it barely moved the curtain, but the king felt it, a cool finger, brushing against the side of his face. He didn't move, he just let it pass. The stars had vanished now behind the soft clouds. The sky looked smoother than before, like black silk drawn tight. No sparkle, no color, just dark, but not empty, full of something quiet, something slow. His chest rose again, gently, then fell. No effort, no thought, just air in and air out. The blanket stayed tucked close to his neck, the edge pressed gently against his chin. His feet, warm and still, stayed wrapped beneath the folds of fabric. His fingers twitched once, then stopped. The bones in his hands ached a little from the cold, but he didn't mind. He didn't think about it. He simply noticed, then let the thought drift away. A memory brushed his mind again. A hallway lit by candles, a boy walking beside him, the sound of pages turning in a quiet room, a table set for supper, a dog barking in the far courtyard, a falcon landing on his arm. Then, nothing, just the soft pulse of silence. His eyelids fluttered once, then stayed closed. His jaw relaxed more. His tongue rested against the roof of his mouth, not heavy, not dry, just still. He moved one shoulder an inch lower into the mattress. The blanket shifted with him, then everything was still again. Outside the wind passed by once more. It whispered past the stone. It rattled a shutter gently, then kept moving. Inside, the night wrapped tighter around the walls, like a soft hand closing over a candle. The room was now more shadow than space, more memory than matter, more stillness than sound, and the king rested inside it, unmoving, unbothered, not chasing sleep, not running from wake, just resting. The castle, like him, had settled. The halls no longer echoed, the torches no longer flickered, even the mice had gone quiet. The stones breathed with the cold, and the air wrapped itself around the old wood and the soft wool. Nothing disturbed it, no knock, no call, no sudden noise, only time, moving slowly, like molasses, like mist, like breath, and the king floated in it, weightless, present, peaceful, still. The night outside had grown heavier. The air was thicker now, like a soft wool blanket covering the land. The clouds had moved fully across the sky, hiding every star. There was no moon to be seen. On a smooth sheet of darkness stretching above the castle, like the roof of a sleeping world, inside the king's chamber, nothing moved. The fire had long turned cold, Only ash remained in the hearth, gray and quiet. Even the lantern by the door had burned out. Its little flame was now a black wick, surrounded by a pool of melted wax. The light was gone, and with it every flicker, every shadow, every golden edge on the stone. Now everything was still and dark. The bed was the only shape that remained, a quiet mound of warmth in the center of the room. Underneath the heavy blanket, the king lay motionless, his face turned slightly to the side, his arms resting close to his chest, his knees bent just a little. His mouth was closed, his eyes too, but his brows were soft, relaxed. There was no tension, no pull, only ease, only softness, only stillness. Outside, the mist that had floated along the ground now touched the castle walls. It climbed gently up the stone, not like smoke, not like fog, but like a whisper rising upward. It pressed against the lower windows, crept along the cold ledges, and rested there. A quiet owl somewhere far off let out a single call. Foo, then silence again. Far below the tower, a dog sighed in its sleep. Then the wind came back, not loud, not strong, but fuller, like it had gathered stories from the woods and returned to tell them to the stone. It touched the castle roof first, then slid down the walls, then wrapped around the tower. Its sound was soft, low, like the edge of a long breath. Inside the king's chamber, a curtain lifted just a little, a slow wave, then it fell. The king didn't stir. He didn't need to. The world around him had grown quiet enough to carry him, not away, but deeper, deeper into the stillness. His fingers moved once, a small twitch, then back to rest. His breathing was so slow now it seemed like the room breathed with him. In, pause, out, again, a little longer, a little softer. No sound, only rhythm. The wooden bed beneath him creaked once, soft and low. The sound disappeared into the air before it could echo. The walls held everything still, not tight, just enough. The blanket covering him shifted slightly as the air cooled. Its edges settled along the sides of the mattress, tucking themselves like careful hands. The pillow cradled his head. It felt more like earth now than fabric. Firm, supportive, familiar, not shaped by time but by you. The king's lips parted a little, just enough to let the air move easily. His tongue rested against the roof of his mouth. His jaw was light. His eyes stayed closed. Not heavy, not dreaming, just closed, like two doors behind which everything could rest. No need to open, no need to search. Everything was quiet. Everything was enough. The night deepened. The wind touched the corners of the castle again. A shutter bumped gently on the far side of the tower, then stopped. A drop of water fell from a stone ledge into a puddle below. Plop. The sound was small but round, then quiet again. The clouds above thickened. A soft, slow drizzle began. Not a rain, just tiny drops tapping gently on the roofs, the walls, the windows. Tick, tick, tick. The sound moved slowly around the stone, wrapping it like a lullaby. No thunder, no storm, just water finding its way home. The king heard it, even in his stillness, even in the depth of calm. He heard it the way trees hear wind, not with ears, but with being. The drops slid down the windows now, little lines of silver in the dark. Some ran straight, some curled and met others. Some stopped halfway. They all moved slowly, very slowly, like they didn't want to disturb anyone, like they knew the whole world was sleeping. The king remained still. His chest rose once more, then lowered. His toes curled slightly beneath the blanket, then relaxed. His spine sank deeper into the mattress, finding a shape that felt like it had always belonged to him. His thoughts were nothing now, not because they were gone, but because they had settled, like dust, like snow, like sleep itself. Somewhere in the back of the room, a wooden beam shifted, a slow stretch, then stillness again. The roof above held strong, the walls stood tall. Everything around the king stayed as it had for years, and tonight was no different. The air cooled further, but the warmth inside the bed never left. The linen sheet underneath him felt softer now, not because it had changed, but because he had. The body knows comfort when the mind goes quiet, and his mind was quieter than it had been all day. His dreams didn't come, but neither did thought. He floated in a place where time didn't count minutes, only moments, only feelings, only quiet. The rain touched the ground outside, soft fingers tapping gently on leaves, on grass, on roof tiles. The castle's stone soaked it in. It didn't run. It didn't resist. It welcomed it, the way the king welcomed rest. The curtain by the window rose again, then fell. The room stayed dark, but not empty. Full of silence, of comfort, of night. And in the center of it, the king rested, still, unmoving, but alive in every sense. Not alone, just quiet, like the room, like the stone, like the rain. The rain outside had changed. It no longer came in tiny soft drops. Now it moved like a quiet curtain, falling in even lines, smooth and steady. It wasn't loud, just more present, like a hand pressed gently against a window. A soft rushing sound wrapped the castle, moving across the roofs, slipping down the walls, sliding over the stones and courtyards. It sounded like a long breath that never stopped. Inside the chamber, the king still lay in bed. Nothing had changed. His body had not moved. His hands stayed close to his chest, under the thick blanket. His head rested deep into the pillow. The shape of his body made a soft rise in the bed's surface, like a hill of warmth in a valley of cold stone. The room was black now, not the kind of black that feels empty, but the kind that feels full of warmth, full of quiet, full of layers. His eyes remained closed, not pressed shut, just closed, like a book left open at the last page. His mouth was still, his face relaxed, his jaw loose, soft. No thoughts danced behind his eyes now. No memories stirred, only the slow beat of time moving around him. The last bit of light in the room came from outside, not moonlight, not torchlight, just the soft gray-blue reflection of rain against stone. It crept through the high slit window, spilled onto the floor like a puddle of light, and faded before it reached the far side of the chamber. The curtain near the window moved again, not fully, just the lower edge. It lifted, then dropped. Outside, a wooden bucket on the balcony filled with rain. Drip, drip, drip. The sound was slower now. The water inside had risen. Each new drop landed closer to the surface. And so the sound changed. More full, more round, more gentle. Down in the garden, a tree leaned slightly with the wind. Its leaves, soaked with water, stuck together. A single droplet hung from the tip of one. It swayed for a long time, then let go. It landed on a stone with a soft pat. The grass below had darkened with rain. Its color deeper now, its smell richer. The air was full of it, not sharp, not muddy, just deep and green, like earth breathing after a long rest. The stone walls of the castle soaked it in too. They were cool to the touch, still, steady, unmoved by time, like they had always been and always would be. Inside the room, the king's breathing matched the rhythm of the rain, slow, even, soft. His fingers under the blanket moved just once, gently curling, then relaxing again. His toes remained still. His legs, heavy beneath the fabric, didn't shift. His shoulders rose slightly, then fell. The blanket moved with him, quiet and smooth. His skin felt warm. His chest was calm. The room held him like a cradle, the night deeper now than before. The scent in the chamber had changed just a little. The old wood from the bed warmed by his body. The wool blanket soaking in his breath. The last bits of smoke that had once risen from the hearth, now gone. Only the scent of stone and fabric remained. A peaceful scent, like time sitting in silence. The room was no longer watching. It was listening, to him, to the rain, to the nothing between. A mouse far below the floor scurried once, then stopped. Even that tiny sound did not break the calm. It joined it, became part of it. A quiet note in the symphony of night. The guards outside the tower shifted their weight in the dark. One leaned on his spear, the other touched the hilt of his sword. Not because of danger, just habit. Even they moved slower now, their eyes less sharp, their breathing more steady. The whole castle had joined the king. It moved with him, or perhaps around him, like wind around a stone, or water around a sleeping boat. The king's chest rose again, then lowered, his breath so soft now, it barely moved the air, his heart beating steady beneath the blanket, his skin pressed warm against the linen, his bones quiet in their rest. No thoughts now, no stories, no names, no duties, only this moment, this breath, this stillness. He was not thinking of the garden, not of the falcon, not of the boy who brought the cloak, not of the warm milk, Not of the wooden chest, not of the old sword on the wall, not of war, not of peace, just being, nothing more, nothing less. Rain tapped the glass again, the wind hummed through the tower slit, a leaf danced down the side of the stone, somewhere far off. A gate creaked gently in its hinges, then stopped. All sounds became one sound, a soft, wide, deep hush. It filled the room, and the bed, and the space between breath, and the space between dreams, and the space inside his chest. The king remained still, wrapped in silence, held by darkness, cradled by air. The night had deepened beyond hours now. Time itself had folded. There were no bells, no footsteps, no whispers, only soft, only calm, only peace, and within it the king rested. The candle on the far table had gone out a long time ago. Its wick had burned down to a soft black twist. The wax around it sat still. It had cooled into a small puddle with a needy rim, like a pond frozen in place. Nothing moved there now. Nothing flickered. Only silence stayed behind. Outside the rain had slowed. It was no longer a curtain of water. Now it came in soft tap, 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 like small fingers playing gently on stone. Each drop sounded different. Some landed on leaves, some on windows, some on wooden ledges. Each sound was quiet, calm, like the world breathing very softly. The wooden door in the hallway creaked. Just once, not like someone opened it. Just like it stretched in its sleep. Old wood does that. It remembers everything. The cold, the warm, the nights, the years. It speaks without word. Far beneath the castle floor, water ran slowly through old stone pipes. It was not loud, just steady, like a whisper in a tunnel. It flowed past smooth stones over moss around curves made hundreds of years ago. That sound rose up, barely through the cracks and seams in the floor. Even the mice could hear it. And maybe the king too, though he did not move. His head rested still on the pillow, his breath slow, not shallow, not deep, just steady, just right. His face did not wrinkle with thought. His eyes stayed closed, not forced, just gentle, like two leaves floating on a calm river. Faint light touched the ceiling, not from a flame, not from the moon, just from the color of the rain clouds changing slowly. It was the kind of light that had no shape. It didn't make shadows. It didn't push darkness away. It just blended in, soft and gray, almost blue, almost silver, like quiet folded into more quiet. The light touched the wooden beam above the bed. It slid down one side, touched the wall, rolled onto the floor, and stopped near the foot of the bed. There a slipper lay on its side, not new, not old, just worn, like it had been used and cared for. The leather soft from use, the inside warm from memory. Nobody picked it up, nobody moved it. It stayed just where it was, still, like it was waiting. Outside the trees swayed again, slowly, their branches heavy with water, the leaves still dripping. Each droplet hung a little longer now before letting go. The grass below didn't mind. It drank in each drop. The ground was full now, soft under the weight of the sky. And from the tower window, none of it could be seen, only heard, only felt in the air. That soft coldness that touched the skin just enough to notice. Not sharp, not painful, just real, just there. Small insect buzzed once across the ceiling, then landed on the stone wall and folded its wings, its body quiet, its legs tucked in. It had no place to be. It rested too. The king did not notice, but that didn't matter. Both rested. Both were still. The room held them both, just like it held the chair, and the old scroll on the shelf, and the wool cloak draped over the bench. Everything in the room seemed to breathe the same slow rhythm now. No rush, no reason to hurry, only this, only now. The walls no longer remembered the noise of war. They didn't remember footsteps or shouting, or horns. They didn't remember fire. They remembered only the last few hours. The warmth, the quiet, the stillness, the gentle way the king had leaned back, how he had closed his eyes, how he had pulled the blanket up with slow hands, how his shoulders relaxed. The walls held that moment like a treasure, and they would not let it go. Not tonight, not now. Small rug at the side of the bed had curled at one corner, just a little, as if someone had walked over it and it stayed that way. Its threads were thick, its color faded, but it was soft. It had seen hundreds of nights. It had felt feet in winter and in summer. It had caught small drops of water, and today it simply lay there, bent, quiet, still, waiting for no one, doing nothing, being only itself. The wind outside paused for a while. No sound, no movement, then returned, but not loud, just soft again, sliding along the castle walls like a blanket being pulled into place, covering the roof, filling the edges, tucking in the spaces where cold might try to creep in. Even the towers leaned a little in the wind, like listening, like dreaming, like sleep. And in the king's chamber all was still. Fingers lay open now, not curled, not tight, just open, the tips resting lightly against the fabric, the skin pale, but warm, the nails clean, the knuckles smooth. His ring stayed on his finger, not heavy, not bright, just there. It caught the soft gray light, then let it go, just a blink, just a whisper of shine, nothing more. A bird outside made a soft call, then fell silent. It was not a song, not a cry, just a note, one single note, like a sigh turned into sound. Then it was gone. The bird stayed but did not sing again. It too waited, it too rested. The world seemed to hold its breath, but not in fear, not in worry, just in stillness, like a page between chapters, like the space between two words. The king breathed again, and again, and again, no fast, no slower, only that, only life, only calm. Thread in the blanket glowed softly where the light touched it. It had been stitched with care. Someone had made it by hand, years ago. The pattern simple, the work honest, each stitch a moment, each square a piece of time. And now it covered the king, protecting him, warming him, hiding nothing, showing nothing, just being there, just doing its quiet job. A gentle creak came from the window, just the wood frame moving slightly. It had been dry, now wet. It bent just a little, then rested again. That sound joined the rest, a single note in the song of the night, all together, all quiet, all still. Even the dust in the corners didn't move, even the cobweb near the shelf stayed quiet. Nothing stirred, nothing needed to. The world had slowed to a whisper, and the whisper was warm, and the whisper was long, and the whisper was peace. The morning light slowly grew stronger. It pushed gently through the tall windows of the stone castle, touching the edge of a long wooden table. The table was wide and smooth. Its top showed small cuts and scratches, tacks left by time and daily use. A cloth lay across part of it, folded neatly. The colors were soft brown, cream and faded red. The corners of the cloth curled up just a little, like old leaves. The table was where the king would soon eat his morning meal, but the room was still quiet. Not silent, just calm. Small sounds moved in and out, soft and low, the rustle of a cloak, the creak of a wooden bench, the tap of footsteps far down the hall. It was like a slow wave rolling through the air. There were no bright flames in the room yet, only a few candles. Their light was not strong, just soft orange glows dancing inside glass holders. The flame of one candle moved sideways when the door opened a little. A servant entered. His shoes made light thuds on the stone floor. His hands were careful. In one hand he carried a tray made of dark wood. On the tray was a single piece of warm bread. The bread was thick and rough, not soft like modern bread. The crust was dark. The smell of it filled the room as soon as the tray passed through the door. He placed it on the table without sound. Then he stepped back, standing still with his hands behind his back. Another servant came in. She carried a silver pitcher. It was tall and shiny. Inside was warm milk. Not too hot, not too cold, just the right warmth. She poured the milk into a small metal cup and set it next to the bread. More footsteps followed. A man with a pale cloth over one arm came forward. He had 2 boiled eggs in a wooden bowl. The eggs had soft shells, still damp from the boiling water. He placed them beside the milk. One more servant brought a small jar. Inside it was honey, thick, golden and slow. It had been taken from bees in the castle's garden. The jar was placed near the bread. A small spoon sat beside it. Now the table looked ready, but still the king had not arrived. The servants moved like quiet shadows, preparing the rest of the room. One adjusted the chair slightly. One wiped a silver knife with a cloth. Another checked the floor for dust or crumbs. There were none. Everything was clean, quiet and neat. They waited. The king would eat soon. He entered softly. His steps were not loud. He wore a long robe made of wool. The robe was heavy but warm. Its color was deep brown with tiny patterns sewn along the edges. His hands were free. His hair was brushed. His eyes were not sleepy but not sharp either. They were simply calm. He sat at the table with no rush. The chair made a light sound against the floor. A servant stepped forward and placed a napkin across the king's lap. Another filled his second cup with warm water. The king looked at the food before him. He did not smile. He did not frown. He simply picked up the bread. His fingers pressed lightly into the crust. He broke it in half. Steam rose from the inside. He held the bread near his nose for a second and breathed in slowly. The scent was earthy, baked by the castle's oven, made by hands that had kneaded it in the early dark hours of the morning. He dipped the edge of the bread into the honey. The honey clung to the bread slowly. A little drop fell back into the jar. The king brought the bread to his mouth and took a small bite. Chewed once, twice, swallowed. He took another, and another. He drank a sip of milk. Everything moved at a slow and steady pace. There were no loud sounds, no chatter, no hurry, only the gentle rhythm of eating. The eggs were cracked open. The shell broke with a soft snap. The inside was pale and warm. A pinch of salt from a small dish. Another bite of bread. Another sip of water. The food was not rich, not spicy, not sweet, but it was enough. It filled the stomach. It warmed the chest. It calmed the thoughts. A small sound came from the window. A bird, not singing, just calling once, then gone. The king turned his head slightly, looked toward the window, then turned back. He picked up the cup and drank again. The steam had faded. The milk was now just warm, still good, still soft. Around him the room remained quiet. The servants stood still, their eyes down, their hands folded. They would not speak unless asked. They would not move unless needed. They were like part of the furniture, but living, breathing, ready. The king looked at the silver knife. He picked it up and cut another piece of bread, spread a little more honey, lifted it to his mouth. A slow chew, a deep breath, a moment of stillness. He did not rush. Time did not push him. His day was long. He would meet people. He would read letters. He would speak to guards. But not yet. Now he just ate. A servant stepped forward and placed a fresh cloth beside the king's hand. The cloth was soft linen, clean, still warm from the fire where it had been laid. The king wiped his fingers gently. He placed the cloth back, took the last sip of milk, looked at the honey jar, tilted it slightly, watched the honey move inside, thick and golden, like slow sunlight. He smiled just slightly, then let the jar rest again. He stood. The chair made a soft sound as it moved back. He did not speak. He simply turned and walked away, back down the hall. His footsteps soft, steady, unrushed. The servants waited, watched him leave, then moved forward, cleared the table, picked up the cup, folded the napkin, placed the spoon in the bowl, wiped the table, and slowly, carefully, set everything back to where it had been. The breakfast was done, but the day was only just beginning. The sky outside the stone castle turned darker. Slowly, shadows stretched across the thick walls. The tall windows let in only a small amount of fading light now. The sun had already dipped behind the hills, leaving a soft purple glow behind the mountains far away. Inside the castle, torches had already been lit. Their gentle flames flickered against the gray stones, painting warm, moving patches on the walls. The king stood in a long hallway. His robe was heavier now, made from thicker fabric. It had long sleeves that brushed against the floor. A servant carefully placed a fur collar over his shoulders. The air was cold but not biting, just enough to make one wrap their arms tightly if they stood too still. The king looked down the hall. To his right was the guard station, where a few soldiers in quiet armor leaned against the wall, their heads lowered slightly in respect. They didn't speak. One of them nodded once. That was all. The king turned and walked slowly down the corridor. His footsteps made the same sound they always did, soft thuds on old stone. The sound echoed just a little. Each step felt steady, as though he had taken the same path 1,000 times. The walls beside him were lined with faded banners, reds, greens, golds, each bearing a different symbol of the kingdom. A lion, a mountain, a silver moon, all old, all dusty at the edges. He passed a wide archway and entered the chapel. The room was quiet and still. Candles burned in neat rows on iron stands. Their light wobbled like small stars. The king knelt slowly at the front. No one else spoke. The priest, A quiet man in dark robes stood behind him with his head bowed. A single breath moved through the space, then another. Time passed slowly in that room. The king closed his eyes. His hands rested gently together. He didn't say the prayers loudly. He didn't even move his lips much. He only breathed. He thought. He waited. Not for a voice. Not for a sound. Just for peace. Then he stood. Without speaking, he turned. He nodded once at the priest. The priest nodded back, then faded behind a curtain. The king walked back the way he came. He reached the great door to his chambers. 2 guards stood on either side. They pulled the heavy doors open without a word. Inside, the room was warm. A fire crackled in the corner hearth. Its flames stretched upwards, making little popping sounds. The bed was ready. It was large and wooden, covered in heavy wool blankets. The headboard had carved shapes, oak leaves, flowers and a sun in the center. The bedposts rose high, with soft curtains draped down, tied back for now. The king stepped inside. He looked around slowly. There was a chair in the corner. His boots were there, lined neatly. His crown was placed on a small shelf, not gold but silver with a cross at its peak. He removed his robe. A servant helped him into a linen tunic. The fabric was soft and loose. His shoulders sank gently as he sat on the edge of the bed. The servant left. The room was his alone. The fire burned lower now. Its glow danced along the stones. The king sat quietly. He looked into the flames. He saw them sway. They reminded him of something. A tent in the wind. A candle beside his mother's bed. His wife's voice, soft and slow. He closed his eyes again, but just for a moment. He opened them and looked toward the window. The moon had not risen yet. Only the stars. The stars were so many. They seemed to move but they didn't. Just twinkled, far away, and quiet. The king stood. He walked to a table in the corner. There was a cup of water, cool, clear. He drank slowly, only 2 sips, then placed it back. He turned to the window. He touched the glass gently. It was cold, not freezing, just cool. Outside the garden was still. No wind, no bird, just stillness. A leaf moved slightly, then stopped. He turned back to the bed. He lay down slowly. The sheets were pulled up. The pillow was soft, but not too soft. He turned onto his side. His hands rested beneath his head. His eyes stayed open. His mind wandered. He remembered when he was a child. He had a toy horse, made of wood. Its legs were uneven, and it wobbled when it rolled. He loved it. He used to pretend it was a real war horse. He gave it a name, Thorn. He had whispered it to the horse every night. "Good night, Thorn." He hadn't thought of it in years. But now, lying in the dark, it came back. He smiled, just a little. The fire made a soft crack. A small piece of wood fell inside. He heard it. He liked it. He liked small sounds. They made him feel safe. The castle made many small sounds. Stone settling, wood shifting, the wind humming through the chimney. He listened to them. He counted them. He turned over once. The sheets rustled. He pulled them higher over his shoulder. His toes curled under the wool. The pillow was warmer now. His eyes closed again. This time, longer. Still. No sleep. Just rest. Just stillness. His thoughts slowed down. One by one they drifted away. The meeting tomorrow. The letter from the east. The talk with the cook. Gone. 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 Just breath now. Just warmth. Just wait. The fire was smaller. Its light was softer. The room darker. He felt the world fading. Not in a bad way. In a soft way. Like a curtain slowly lowering. The stars outside blinked softly. The wind hummed low. And the king in his bed let out one long breath. Not a sigh. Just a breath. A letting go. A goodbye to the day. His fingers twitched once. Then were still. His foot moved. Then rested. His chest rose. And fell. Rose. And fell. Then rose again. And stayed. The fire dropped to just embers. The stars stayed watching. And sleep took the king like a slow wave. Quiet. Still. Deep. And calm. If this helped you to sleep well, then you can support me to make more videos like these by purchasing products for sleep from our store that actually will give you all benefits. Or if you feel kind, buy me a tiny cup of coffee. Just a little thing for you, but it's huge for me. Thank you so much, and have a good night.